Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Vincelette. I direct the Writing Center, and I teach in the English department. And I'm going to talk for just a few minutes about grading, which is something that you will all be doing as part of your career. And there's a lot of information in these slides, so I'm going to go rather quickly through the information. And then I talked with Wee about following up later on for future sessions if we wanted to break some of this out. I'm trying to see where the little pointer is. I guess it's over there. Is the brain on this side?
Yes.
All right. I want to just move that little hand. There we go. Okay, let's see. How's it going? Okay. So grading can be an elephant in the room when you're teaching. Students are often wondering how you're going to grade them on their performance. They're often almost obsessional about this. And sometimes form a line at the door, or there are grade grubbers. We all know what that means, I think. That's your students who are looking for ways to get better grades, and they're pulling on you. They're looking for that information, and they're often filled with anxiety during that particular situation. So when we think about grading and how we assign things to students, students think about writing as an assignment, which is a grade. Those things are just equal. Writing equals assignment equals grade. And when we think about writing, the level that we work, we think about writing as something that is participating in a discipline, so that we're involved in something a lot larger than ourselves, and we're contributing to some field of study. But students don't think about their work in that way. So we have to try to reinforce that with them, that the writing that they do in a class is not just a means to an end, the grade, but that they're doing something larger with their learning by writing in a class. So we all have fears about grading, and if you go to this PowerPoint later on and you want to take a look at it, you can actually click on this and link out to the movie A Christmas Story. Some of you might be familiar with this movie. It's a classic American movie in which a young boy named Ralphie, he's growing up, and he wants this BB gun for Christmas, and there's all these wonderful scenes that involve this little boy. In this scene, he is hoping to get a good grade on a paper that he gives to his teacher. And he hands it to her, and he starts to fantasize about getting an A+ on it, and she's dancing around the room, and she's all happy. And that's what students hope for. Not necessarily what they're always going to get, as we well know, but that's what they hope for. But they're afraid. They're afraid of what grade they're going to get, and often we're afraid, too, of how long it's going to take us to grade things. So our ego plays a role in grading. The way that we feel about ourselves as instructors, like our ethos, basically. And students also are concerned about their own ego when they are writing and when they are turning things in to us. So I think that the way that we feel about ourselves, it contributes to the fears that we have about grading. One of the things that I thought was fundamental in my learning to be a teacher was understanding the difference between grading and feedback. Because I used to think, when I first started my career, probably 20 years ago, maybe, and I taught in the Virginia Beach public school system as a high school teacher for years. And I didn't know that there was a difference between feedback and grading for a long time. That feedback is something that's not necessarily attached to a grade. And that by the time you actually give a grade to a student on something, if you've seen different iterations or drafts of what they're working on, you can give them feedback before you give them a grade. And that those things don't always have to come together. So sometimes grading and feeding come together at the end, but they don't always have to. We have formative feedback, which is the feedback that you give to students along the way with different kinds of drafts that they turn into you of papers, or different pieces of projects, like if you have a project or report that they're working on, and you have them turn that in stages. You can give them formative feedback that leads up to the final product. On a final product, like a paper, you can give them summative or summative, depending on how you want to pronounce it, feedback at the very end, where you give them a summary of sorts on what you want to tell them along with their final grade. So I wanted to mention that because when you're preparing to start working with students and giving them feedback, it's important to stop and ask yourself, are you going to give them little bits and pieces along the way on their assignments of feedback of where they could improve and what they're doing well? Or do you want to wait and do it all at the end when you're faced with the giant mountain of papers, which may not actually be a giant mountain of papers. It might be a giant theoretical or invisible mountain in your inbox or something, or sitting there for you like a bad present on Blackboard, that you have to open, and then you look at it, you have this huge, huge amount of things that you're going to have to look at. So think about staggering out assignments to help yourself and your students. I think there's a lot of fear involved in grading because of the amount of time that it takes, particularly grading writing, which is what I specialize in. Ways that you can manage the fears that you might have or just time management issues. One thing is to set limits. I'd like to add on here too, to start the day that you collect assignments. I'm going to add that on here. It's something I started working on in the last year, forcing myself to start the day I get things, which is really hard to do. But I find it galvanizes me. It makes me start working more, and if I delay it a day, I start going down the rabbit hole. Then it's easier to delay it another day, and then it's easier to delay it another day after that. So I strongly recommend starting the day that you get things from your students, and then set limits. And what I mean by setting limits is how many are you going to do a day? Make some sort of schedule when you want to turn them back and say, okay, if I've got 50 to do, I'm going to do 10 a day because I want to turn these in 5 days. Or you want to do them a week after, take your number, divide it out by a week, maybe give yourself a day off in the middle, something like that. But actually schedule it like it's an appointment in your life, and you're going to end up being in a better position than if you sit and you do what I did one Christmas break when I taught high school, which was have 2 large brown paper grocery bags filled with essays. And my family was not happy, and I was not happy. And so I began to study how to prevent that. Another thing you can do is ask students to guide you. And that might sound a little bit weird at first, but when you get a set of papers from students, ask them to turn in answers to questions along with their papers. What are the top 3 things in this paper that you want me to notice? And then ask them to highlight it. And then ask them the 3 things in the paper they struggled with, and ask them to highlight that in a different color. So pick your colors. Like you can do yellow for caution and green for good or something like that. And then ask them why and have them turn that in with a paper. And then when you grade it, you can follow whatever rubric you have, but you also can look pretty much at those 6 things for whatever they turn in, and you're giving them the feedback that they asked you for when they turned it in. They don't realize you're doing that to a certain extent, but what you're doing also is you're building a relationship with those students to help them give you better products along the way, like in the future. So ask them a set of questions with their work when they turn it in. And also perform authentic grading. And what I mean by that is when you grade something, don't hesitate. Give it the grade that you think it deserves. Deliberating, how many of you have done this before? I think some of you probably taught already. You deliberate. You sit, you think about it. Is it an A, a B, or is it a B or a C, or a C or a D, and you drive yourself crazy over thinking about it. It ends up wasting a lot of time. So trust yourself when you're grading. Give it the grade that you think it deserves. Move on. That's some of the best advice that I can give you. All right, so goals for yourself are important. Goals for students. Ask them to set goals before they turn something in. That's another thing that they could turn in with the paper is what goals that they set for themselves and how they think that they did or did not meet them. That guides you as well in the feedback you can give to students. The timelines I mentioned, and then, it looks like I did add it on there. I forgot that I had done that. Starting the day that you get the papers. Set a time for how much time you want to spend on each paper. That's going to vary depending on the length of the assignment, but setting some kind of time, like I'm going to spend 20 minutes per paper, that's it. You will force yourself to work faster, especially if you have a big timer out or you set the timer on your phone and you have it sitting right in front of you. That's helpful. You can limit yourself to give comments by sections of a paper. So like at the end of each section, give comments there only. What is a trap and a problem is if you try to give a comment on every sentence or edit it. That's not feedback. Correcting grammar is not feedback. A lot of people think that it is because that's how they were given their papers back, but correcting every single comma actually doesn't help students learn. The only time that'll help them learn is if you make them do that paper over and they have to go and they have to fix commas, but if you fix every one for them, they learn nothing. You can edit, if you really want to edit, like you just can't stand it and you want to do the grammar, do it on the first page and then draw a line. I stopped doing grammar here. Fix the rest of the commas like this one, circle it, in the rest of your paper. That gets the student to interact with the feedback and then to correct it. Set up a reward system. That's why the wine and chocolate are there. After a certain amount of time, give yourself something. It might be that you get to get out of your seat and walk around the room or something. I know, I probably only have a couple more minutes, week. Yep. Okay. These are some of the kinds of questions that I ask students to turn in with their papers. This is part of my grading guide. Kind of the same thing I mentioned a few minutes ago. So I hope that later on, if you have the ability and time before you grade papers, that you'll be able to go in and maybe make your own versions of this. What would work for you in your classes? What kinds of questions you would ask? It's going to vary by the discipline. Other things I've learned over the years is if I make the same comments over and over again, I copy and paste them onto a separate document. I start keeping boilerplate of repeated comments, and then I just copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste into a student's work. That saves me a ton of time. One of those documents is now 17 pages long. Because I was an APA editor for a while, so the APA one's really good. Try not to say you this, you that to students because it can be accusatory when you're giving feedback on their writing. So stop and look at what you're saying. Say the writing here is rough or something like that. Not you have rough writing. You could have a numbered comment system. Some people create systems as they're teaching. Number one is, that you didn't elaborate on this point or something. Number two is you have problems with run-on sentences or something like that. So you could create your own system. And I highly advocate the use of rubrics. Couple more things. Grade anonymously. Use anchor papers. This takes you longer at first, but will save you time in the end, which is to read through a set of papers and have your representative like A, B, C on down the chain. That can help you set benchmarks while you're grading. Again, avoid editing. Try to balance the needs improvement and the positive statements while you're teaching. Try using a highlighter or a highlighting tool so you can't actually type words. That can help you a lot. You could have a system of your own. Green parts are your best sentences or something like that. Or you made great points everywhere it's in green on your paper. Sit on your hands. Sit on your hands. Read for a while before you make a comment. That's what sit on your hands means. Read for a while before you make a comment, and that'll keep you from trying to write about every single line on every single paper. Watch out for the grade inflation monster. I recommend giving students the grade that they earn, and I recommend that if you have the ability to do so, to have a system in place for allowing students to make some corrections. You can do that. You can arrange that so that it doesn't cost you a lot of extra time grading. It can actually save you time in the long run if you ask students to make corrections and then tell you what they corrected and why. Then you don't have to read and see if they made every correction. You just read what they said that they did. So you can give them a redo option. The way I do that is with track changes. I tell them to go on YouTube and learn how to use it. It takes me about 2 minutes to see whether they did changes or not. It takes them about 2 hours. I don't think it should become a treasure hunt for the instructor to look for every correction. That's also an unhealthy dynamic with your students. So there's a lot of little tricks and games that you can do to make the system better, to save yourself time, to help students, and to, more than anything else, help them learn. I'll just leave this up here as we're transitioning. One of the last things that I do when I give students a paper back, and it's the first paper in a class, I do ask them to redo their paper. And I give them points back on the paper for doing it over. But I have them use track changes, and I have them highlight things, and I have them tell me what they fixed, so that I'm not going in and seeing, did they do that comma I told them? You would want to just kill yourself if you did it that way. But if you ask them to use track changes, all you have to do is open it up and look at it, and you can see what they did. And it's a very powerful thing for the students. They learn a lot because they become reflective about their work, and it doesn't take you a lot of time. So I think that that's probably my best piece of advice there, is to be authentic with your grading, use your own tips and tricks, keep your boilerplates, sit on your hands. So, thank you.
One question from WebEx, and the student was asking,
Where should I go to answer WebEx question? Am I good?
I'll just ask it. How do you deal with grading the first paper differently from the last paper? Because something happens sometimes in between grading the first paper that you graded the last paper.
Oh, at the end of the stack?
Mm-hmm.
The best way is to use anchor papers if it's the first time you've ever taught a class. Skim a good chunk of the papers. Like skim about, well, it's going to depend on how long they are. Anywhere from 10 to 20 papers. Skim them. Depends on, if you're dealing with a 3-pager or a 30-pager, you're going to have to adjust, obviously. But skim a bunch of papers so you get a sense of how students are doing as a group. Then you can make your anchor papers. So an anchor paper means this is a representative A, this is a representative B, this is a representative C, D, and F. If you have an idea before you get to the rest of the stack what a representative example is of each of those grades, you'll move faster because you will be able to group the students after looking through enough of them to have a sense of how they're doing. I think that prevents the problem of if you start either too hard or too easy at the beginning, which is what I think that question is actually about. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Beth.
Thank you.